What's up guys, MikeCoco back here, bringing you guys a new video on the new costumes of the month for May. Now, this video is quite late, but I had to do some testing for this month's costumes because it is somewhat ambiguous as to the skill description of some of the costumes. So I had to do that before I can make a conclusion for this month. So anyways, we have 3 costumes for this month, 2 of which are your standard free heroes and 1 of which is for your mythic season hero. Now, before I start it off, I do want to say that, in my opinion, this month's costumes are quite underwhelming. You can purchase the costume box if you want, but I don't exactly recommend any of them at this point. However, some of them may prove to be useful, quite specifically Frank's. So, we have Frank's costume. Frank originally was a decent dispeller because he was the only one available. However, with the introduction of Jury and Remy and a bunch of other heroes with their costumes, Frank's pretty much useless at this point. Now, his costume makes him a little bit more useful, I would say. It makes him situational. So what happens is that his costume changes him to a 2-turn cleanser, essentially in the form of Party Ione, except in a row, and it guarantees a critical hit on the next turn, so 100% crit chance. Now, I can see this being somewhat useful because as of this point, we only have a few 2-turn cleansers that I can think of. Party Ione, Remy with costume, and I think that's it. I guess you can consider Gwyn, but I don't remember if that's 2 turns or 1 turn. So Frank definitely is quite unique in that aspect, since there's only 2 heroes that have that skill. And if you consider mythic skill, he's also the only one with the Phoenix mythic skill. So that means that he can actually tank a hit and still survive. Which is why I think that he might be useful in the future. Specifically Explore, where in modes where if you die, you kind of lose a hero. But with the Phoenix skill, it means that he can take that hit, and as long as he gets shielded the next turn, he won't die. And you can reuse him. So that's the only reason why I think Frank is somewhat useful. But the problem I have with him is that his Fury is still very high with his costume. He has no Fury reduction of any sort, and in things like Explore, Fury is quite limited, and 300 Fury is going to be hard to pull off. So it's debatable on whether or not he's going to be useful, but I think he does have the potential to be useful in future game modes, such as Explore or any other game modes that involve limited Fury. So with that in mind, Frank is probably the quote-unquote recommendation of this month. However, not a solid recommendation because he's not outstanding in terms of usability. I can't really see him being used right now. Maybe in floor 6, but again, I don't have enough data to actually test him with in floor 6 because I need him as a myth level first in order to use his Phoenix skill. So recommendation is probably Frank, but I would be hesitant to buy him, to be honest. So the next hero we have is Melissa's skill, or not skill but hero, and her costume changes her to a not much of a difference. The only thing she adds is critical damage for bows, which is kind of similar actually to Kuroko's costume, which was, I think, increased critical damage for sword heroes. And actually, now that I think about it, there are a lot of parallels in between the two. They're both 300 Fury, and they're both 3x3s. So with that in mind, Melissa is not useful. Now, I know some people have been questioning what this means. Rain unavoidable. Highlight on unavoidable. Arrows on enemies in a 3x3 area. I was also curious as to what this meant. At first, I was thinking, can it break through shields, or does it allow you to hit through people that survive, people that have Phoenix skills? I did some testing, but quite limited because I found it hard to find enemies that actually had shields. So, if you guys think of any PvE heroes that do have shields, please let me know, and I'll continue doing testing. But what I've determined is that I've tested Melissa and her costume in PvP arena and used her against heroes that have shields, such as Lucas and Michael. And I used her skill with a lower tier bow so that her bow doesn't actually break through the shield. And the unavoidable part I assumed that it meant that despite what weapon you're using, you will always be able to hit through the shield, because that's what unavoidable means. You know, you can't avoid it even if you have a shield up. And I used a skill and did no damage to the people that had shields up. So I don't think this unavoidable actually means anything. I think it's just part of the skill description and it doesn't actually affect the gameplay or the game mechanics. So take that with a grain of salt, but I don't believe it does anything at this point. Um, and even then, if we assume that unavoidable is part of the skill description and it's not actually a change in her skill, she is again quite useless because I can bring up the same argument I did with Kuroko's costume. Critical damage, not too bad, but when it's limited to specifically bow heroes and at a 300 fury cost, I don't think she's going to prove to be that useful. I also don't think her mythic skill is that great. I always get the bow heroes mixed up, like Aaron, Alina, and Melissa, because they're like all bow heroes and they're all like, you know, in the earlier seasons. So where is Melissa? I can't find her. Or is she S2? I think she might be S2. Where is she? Huh, I actually can't find her. Where is she? No, she is season 1. I think she is... There we go. Okay, so right in the corner. Increases range attack heroes. So, not exactly too useful. Maybe useful for PvE, like Mythic Raid, but that's like... She's pretty much only useful in that mode, if you're gonna get her, which is kind of limited in my opinion. So I wouldn't exactly recommend her anyway. And lastly, we have War God. War God. I'm just gonna call him War God P because I can't pronounce his name. So, or the second War God. I'll call him the second War God. So essentially, the second War God, his costume gives him increased damage to bosses by 30%. And as you can see here, this is static. It doesn't matter what level it is, or what level your second War God is. It could be at level 1 or 125. It's always going to be 30%. Which is not bad, but it kind of detracts from his focus. And what I mean by that is his original skill is a 3x3 stun for 2 turns, and it increases attack and critical hit damage, which makes him, you know, fairly useful for PvP. And now he adds a skill that increases damage to bosses, which makes him kind of PvE oriented. But he doesn't exactly excel too well in PvE because he kind of is really thirsty for Fury at 300 Fury. He doesn't have any kind of Fury reduction with his costume, which is kind of bad because a lot of the 3x3s actually do have Fury reductions. Like Uriel, I think, has a Fury reduction. Kamal also has a Fury reduction. I don't remember if Metatron has one. I don't think she does. Are there any other 3x3s that I can think of? Remy doesn't have a Fury reduction, but she's only a 200 Fury hero. So yeah, a lot of the like 3x3s, they have some sort of Fury reduction, and the fact that War God does not have it makes him quite thirsty for Fury, especially in modes like Explore. So I can't see him being too useful in Explore because of that 300 Fury cost. And the stun doesn't exactly help in PvE because pretty much all the heroes, or all the enemies rather, in PvE are immune to that kind of stuff, you know, crowd controls. So, like, with the costume, it kind of puts him in an awkward spot. Do you use him in PvP or do you use him in PvE? Because he doesn't really excel in either of them at this point. But if you have the second War God, obviously, you know, get his costume because it increases damage, but I have a problem with his, you know, formation placement because I don't exactly know where to use him. Whereas, you know, a hero like Kamal, I know exactly, you know, she is a PvE oriented hero specifically for Mythic Raid, and I probably wouldn't get too much out of her using her in PvP. But with War God, you know, it's kind of ambiguous. You know, maybe I can get the 2-turn stun to proc, but then his costume doesn't really add anything, so, you know, what do I do? So, honestly, this month's costume is not that great. I do recommend purchasing it, just in case, but you can be hesitant to actually pick a costume. If you really do want a costume, I would recommend Frank's. Otherwise, I would actually recommend just leaving the costume box there. Or even not buying it if that's up, you know, if you feel unlucky and you're not going to pull any of these heroes, you know, don't bother with it. But I don't recommend any of the costumes this month, but if I had to pick one, it would probably be Frank for free to play and obviously Second War God. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Peace.